The first publicly released demo for Brigandine Abyss is here, admittedly at time of recording only on PC, and while it is a relatively short and condensed demo, it does give us a lot of insight into what the full release is going to be providing to us in just a few months. Some of that is very good. Some of it, I have some concerns about, but overall, I found it a quite enjoyable experience. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and today we're talking about my first impressions of a more full vision of Brigandine Abyss. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of the turn-based strategy or turn-based tactics RPG genre, including upcoming titles like Brigandine Abyss, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Also, I'm going to be shouting this out for the next little while, so please do bear with me. If you would be interested in directly supporting the channel, please do consider checking out my Patreon linked in the description. I have some nice changes coming in the extremely near future for those of you who do choose to directly support the channel. It massively helps me out as it just gives me a stable foundation to work from in the ever-changing landscape of ad revenue on YouTube, and I'm going to have some new options available to all of you to reward you and show you my appreciation for that support. Check it out, consider signing up, and you're going to see some new stuff available to you in the very near future. Now, on to Brigandine Abyss. If you watched my live stream at time of recording last night, you saw that we went through the first of the two available campaigns, or at least the first few missions of those campaigns, where we played as Largo from Grand Dragnica. Since then, I have also played through the campaign of the Scarlet Will, encompassing the entirety of the content that is currently available in the demo at this point. I'm going to do a full breakdown of everything we know about the game mechanically from what we've been able to play of it at a later date, but right now, as far as impressions are concerned, game's pretty solid. The biggest highlight for me is the mechanical depth that is currently on display, with various different phases of combat, army building, city management, and the like, while some of the biggest negatives are maybe some story presentation, story writing, and cutscene quality, which we're going to talk about. If you've played the demo or seen other gameplay of it and you'd like to chime in as the video progresses, do please let us know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. I do enjoy having the chance to chat with all y'all based on your experience with what could potentially be a cool new title in 2026. Right off the bat, I want to make it very clear, I am not someone who has played the Brigandine series before. I know it's a big gap in my tactics strategy RPG roster, it's just not something I've had the opportunity to really check out up until this point, so Brigandine Abyss is my entry to the series. That said, as an entry point, it does feel very good. As far as I'm aware, there are no direct connections to past games in the franchise, so as a new player I can jump right in, and the presentation of mechanics, characters, and the like is very well explained. There's a lot of tutorialization, a lot of explanation of different elements, attacks, movement, army building, unit recruiting, and various mechanics that are fairly unique to Brigandine Abyss as far as I'm aware, such as the rally mechanic. I don't feel at all like going into this I'm overwhelmed or confused. I'm able to fall back on my tactics RPG experience and then figure out what this game does differently that it wants me to understand based on that foundation, which is very nice. I imagine I'm not going to be the only one who is fairly new to this franchise and is going to appreciate a fairly gentle learning curve at the beginning of the game, which is not to say that the game is easy by any means. I played the demo on hard in both of the beginning campaigns that you are able to play, and you can definitely feel that you are at a deficit when it comes to accuracy, damage, and sheer numbers on the battlefield. Fortunately, the mechanics that are in play are very adept at giving you the advantage that you need to equal out those numbers, so long as you play intelligently and are able to actually utilize them to your benefit. This means that the gameplay was very engaging and very easy to fall into, and even though you're only able to go through the first couple of battles in either of the two given campaigns in this demo, I can very clearly see how this scope is going to expand greatly as you get access to more cities, more unit types, level up, gain items, all the things that you would expect from a tactics RPG. However, what was less engaging was the story and the characterization. I'm going to tell you right now, even though I've been covering the game up to this point, watching trailers, checking out preview material, looking at websites, playing exclusive demos at things like PAX, I have a hard time remembering what character names are, let alone what their motivations are. Nothing has really stuck out to me as really impactful or interesting the way a lot of other tactics RPGs or games in general tend to. And as a fairly story and lore focused person, when it comes to any game that I play, but especially tactics RPGs, that is very disappointing. Combine that with the fairly lackluster animations and cutscenes and the extremely jilted, very roughly cut story segments that jump from beat to beat, location to location, with barely any transition in between, and this very clearly feels like a game that is not intended to present you a very strong narrative. Could that change as we go through and learn more about the various different nations, characters, what is happening in the overall story? Absolutely, of course. You have the first, 3 battles of 2 of the 6 campaigns to start learning about the story here. So there's clearly a lot that we're not privy to yet, but the initial introduction to it is not very good. Now, from my understanding, Brigandine has always been a series that, while it had a story and sometimes very strong lore behind that story, it was much more focused on the moment-to-moment gameplay and city management and how your story would progress through these kind of skirmishy campaigns. There's never been a set story campaign prior to Brigandine Abyss. This is a very new aspect of a game to add to this new entry to the franchise. So I can forgive a little bit of awkward shonen anime in its presentation. That said, if you are someone who is looking for that type of story, maybe couch your expectations a little bit here. There's a lot of I'm evil McEvil man and I want to destroy the world for reasons, and I am positive justice daughter whose father was killed unjustly and now I must strike out for justice to defend the people justly, or I have a purpose in life and I'm going to fulfill that purpose even if it means fighting against anyone who won't let me fulfill that purpose, and not a lot of character depth beyond that based on what we've seen. This is not helped by the very clipped, awkward-feeling, quote-unquote, animation style of a lot of the cutscenes, which seem a little bit more animatic, like still illustrations that have been animated by some means to create a little bit of an animated cutscene. Fire Emblem, this is not. Neither is it beautiful Final Fantasy Tactics animation. It is very limited in what it presents, and while the art style itself is something that I very much enjoy, even if that is a little bit of a contentious issue in its own right, the actual events that are unfolding here are not the most compelling. And unfortunately, the same can be said for a lot of the animations in battle as well. Some are really cool. In particular, special attacks, magic, and the like do look quite nice, but your basic weapon swings and overall ability activations are fairly limited in scope. But considering the size of the battle map and how long these campaigns are likely to progress, especially once you get into the skirmish mode, that is the quote-unquote real mode for the game based on the franchise's history, I can see why they might not want to put a lot of resources into these when you're likely going to be skipping them or at least fast forwarding through them once you become a little bit of a veteran and are just trying to see how mechanically skilled you have become through these campaigns. Fortunately, the actual character and monster artwork as done by Junko Kawano, who is famously known for doing all of the art for the Suikoden franchise, is still extremely strong, very colorful, very distinct, and with this many different characters and generics on tap, I can only imagine the amount of effort that had to go into creating so many different distinct pieces of artwork and have them look good, even if some of the generics are obviously much more simple than your more story-focused named characters. They all look nice, they're all pleasing to the eye, and seeing as how that's what you're going to be looking at the majority of the time, I'm glad that a lot of the focus seems to have gone there. As far as the music and sound effects are concerned, the actual OST does absolutely slap from what we've heard thus far, although there are a lot of rough cuts and transitions between like player phase and enemy phase, combat music and non-combat music. That feels a little amateurish. I'd like to see that smoothed out a bit by the full release, but the OST itself is very, very good, and that's the core aspect that needs to be very strong in a title like this, so I'm happy to see that. The sound effects are fine overall, although the sound mixing itself is not very good. I had to turn down the sound effects significantly, as in particular, turn transition notifications like player phase, enemy phase were massively louder than anything else in the game and blew out my eardrums and probably the eardrums of anyone else who was using headphones when they were watching my stream. So definitely would like to see that evened out a little bit, even though yes, of course, players can manage it in the menu as well. It's still not a pleasant experience trying to get that to be in line with the rest of your sound. Now, some complaints and concerns aside, I did allude to the fact that the mechanics in Brigandine Abyss do seem to be very strong, and I want to talk about that a fair bit here. At the core of any good turn-based tactics and strategy RPG, you need to have mechanics. And if those mechanics are not really robust, really deep, and very customizable, or very puzzle-oriented in certain types of games where your design is very tight, then you're going to fall on your face no matter how good the rest of the game is. As tactics players, we are extremely number, mechanics, and gameplay focused, and fortunately, from what we've seen of this demo, Brigandine Abyss seems to be firing on all cylinders in that regard. Just in these first few battles, the number of different systems, stats, and mechanics that I had to keep track of felt like a pretty decent brain tease, and I can only imagine that it's going to get much more complicated and much more involved as you get further into a campaign, start promoting units, have multiple cities and towns and bases that you need to maintain garrisons for, get new equipment, etc. It's going to be quite the robust set of systems if this early game is anything to go by. In combat, we have various different types of terrain, height differences, various different elements that comprise a sort of weapon triangle if you're familiar with Fire Emblem, unit classes, unique skills, the rally mechanic that allows your unit leaders to sort of absorb a monster from your retinue to gain some of their skills and benefits, flanking mechanics that provide big boosts to damage and accuracy for both you and the enemy, and a major focus on eliminating squad leaders so you don't have to slog through all of their monster retinue and just wipe them all out at once. Having intelligent positioning and being able to take advantage of poor moves from the enemy is going to be a major facet for this game, especially on hard where, again, as I mentioned, you are at a stat and numbers deficit pretty much across the board at all times. Even just in the demo, there are quite the number of different playable mercenaries and monsters, elemental affinities, etc., that give you a wide range of different strategic options, and I was able to play around a good amount of anything from unicorns, sand golems, dampiers/vampires, pixies, mermaids, squids, and octopi, giant birds, oni, and a whole lot more. Even like wooden puppets, and every single unit type has different things that it is good and bad at. Combine that with the fact that you can recruit massive numbers of monsters and human mercenaries to lead squads, and you have the capability to craft a very large, very diverse, and very unique to you army to go around, conquer the continent, and progress through either the story or the skirmish campaigns. I was already beginning to see some of the tactical usefulness or detriments, even, I would say, of certain unit types. The wolves in particular are extremely strong, long move range, decent damage, good elemental affinity as dark type units, the ability to have effectively Kanto from Fire Emblem so that they can move, attack, and move again. Extremely versatile units when a lot of what you want to be doing is getting the surround on dangerous enemies and focusing them down with as many members of your army as possible. Having a good balance of melee tanks, skirmishers/glass cannons, healers, and damaging/debuffing mages is extremely important, and considering the fact that every single different base or city that you can potentially capture is going to have different human mercenaries that you can recruit and different monster types that you can recruit, I can imagine that your army is going to get very wild very quickly as you progress further and further into a campaign. The fact that we have pre- and post-movement abilities, similar to games like Super Robot Wars, where you have to actually think about if a unit is going to be able to stay in one position to the next turn to use its strongest abilities, or if you need to move it forward and have a unit type that is going to be able to make the most of its skill set while staying on the move is extremely cool. And I'm happy that things like buffs seem to be very important as well. Trying to deal with enemy units that have had a big defense buff cast on them is an absolute nightmare, but at the same time, I feel like I can much more safely toss even a glass cannon unit into the fray if I've been able to give it a defense or magic defense boost, which is always heartening to see because there's far too many games in the genre where things like debuffs, status effects, and buffs just aren't worth spending your time engaging with, as opposed to raw damage to just blow up as many enemies as possible. And I think that's due to the fact that the overall damage output of both you and the enemy, even on hard, is relatively low, except for particular enemy characters, usually named characters, who will hit extremely hard. anything that you fight is generally only going to be dealing a fifth to a quarter of your health in one attack. And seeing as how you have a lot of units on the field, even from the jump, it's not too devastating to take some hits from the opponent. You can always fall back, heal up, and re-engage at a more advantageous time. And that's something that I feel like has been lost from a lot of tactics games in recent time. There's so much of a focus on the Alpha Strike, dealing massive amounts of damage in one attack to eliminate as many enemy units as possible before their turn even comes around. Not really the case, at least from what we've seen in this early game demo for Brigandine Abyss. Of course, that is largely just combat. Then you do get into all of the city and empire management as well, with the ability to buy new equipment, recruit new units, attack and defend against enemies who are going to be progressing from their cities or trying to take their cities so you can get new types of equipment, new types of units. This is the type of system that I would be so happy to see in more turn-based tactics and strategy games because there's just so much flexibility that can come from it. As far as this demo is concerned, we really only get a taste of this meta management system, but I'm extremely excited to see so much more of it. I think it's going to be one of the strongest, most defining aspects of the mechanics of Brigandine Abyss that will help it stand out from the frankly fairly large roster of tactics and strategy games that we've been getting and seem to be continuing to get. All told, my impressions of Brigandine Abyss are fairly solidly split. From a mechanics standpoint, I think this is going to be an extremely fun game to play. The fact that you can recruit generic mercenaries and monsters, name them after your friends, as far as I'm concerned, my channel followers and supporters, and build up your army to progress across a story that you can make your own is super fun and is not something that we see often enough in the genre. The mechanics of battle seem deep, and I can only imagine are going to get much deeper once you start hitting promotions, new gear, etc. And I'm extremely excited to see what all the different unit types, classes, and the like are going to do for your overall strategy. However, on the flip side, while things like the OST are really strong and the actual character art are very nice, I think we're going to have major issues with the quality of the story and the writing, animations of cutscenes and of battle, and the overall appearance of the game. It's wild to say, but there's actually a pretty high standard for tactics and strategy RPGs at this point, both in the indie, AA, and I would dare to say AAA scenes as far as things like Fire Emblem are concerned, and I don't know that Brigandine Abyss is quite living up to some aspects of that, but of course, this is just a demo, there's time to polish things, and we have to see way more of the content of the game before we can draw any definitive answers, but right off the bat, I do have some concerns about these other aspects of the title. That said, I think if you just care about getting in, having a good tactile experience, and something that's going to scratch your brain from a tactical sense, I think Brigandine Abyss is going to have a lot of quality for you and a lot of replayability as well once we can start to explore some of the other factions that are not directly tied to the story campaign and dig more into the classic campaign gameplay that the Brigandine series seems to be known for. This could be one of the biggest releases for the genre for this year. You know I'm going to be covering it with gameplay, tips videos, guides, commentary, discussion, etc. So keep it all locked here and look forward to that August release date. As I said earlier, if you've played this demo for yourself, do please let me know your thoughts about it in the comments down below. And if you're a console player who at time of recording has not yet had the chance to play this demo, keep your eyes peeled. We've heard that the demo should be coming to those consoles sometime in the near future. Once you've had the chance to play it for yourself, come back here. Let me know your thoughts too. It's always good to get some feedback, some discussion, and start pooling our collective knowledge about one of our favorite genres. For now though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. Thank you to all of you who choose to check out my Patreon and directly support the channel. It is massively important for keeping this whole thing afloat. Thank you all so very much. And most importantly, I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.